very good afternoon and welcome to the Business News Summary on Independent Television Abuja. I'm Nkiru Obuli. Starting off, the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, has advised taxpayers to demand for written notice when they receive phone calls from tax officials. Adeosun gave the advice in response to the activities of some fake tax officials posing as officials of the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme (VADE). In a statement on Sunday by her Special Advisor on Media and Communications, Oluyinka Akintunde, the minister warned Nigerians not to provide any details like addresses or bank details. Meanwhile, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, and the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, honored a consistent taxpayer, Lema Jibril, during the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme (VADE) sensitization program in Kaduna. The Kaduna State Governor noted that Jibrin had consistently paid tax to the government for 40 years. Adeosun praised Elder Jibrin for his consistency and diligence in tax payments and urged taxpayers to utilize the amnesty program of the federal government to regularize their tax profile. Meanwhile, the president of Liberia, during his visit to Nigeria, pleaded with Nigerian commercial banks operating in his country not to pull out due to the biting economic challenges bedeviling the country. Let's join Evie Awari for more on business news.
The United States government has expressed concern over the growing indebtedness by African countries a few years after they were relieved of their debts by international financial institutions. The U.S. Department of State, during a background briefing on the first trip of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to Africa, said such loans were unhelpful to the continent. Tillerson is scheduled to meet with Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and also leaders of Chad, Djibouti, Ethiopia and Kenya during his travels from Tuesday, March 6th to 13th. To date, debt reduction packages under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative have been approved for 36 countries, 30 of them in Africa, providing $76 billion in debt service relief over time. The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, has warned those wishing to take advantage of the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme in regularizing their tax status to be mindful of fake tax officials. She said this in response to the reported activities of some fake tax officials who claim to be officials of the V8s. Adeosun advised taxpayers to demand for written notice whenever they received phone calls from tax officials. The V8 program offers a grace period from July 1, 2017 to March 31, 2018 for tax defaulters to voluntarily pay back to the government what they owe.
The House of Representatives has summoned former Minister of Finance, Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, former head of Civil Service of the Federation, and others over allegations of corruption and mismanagement of funds under the Presidential Task Force on Pension Reforms. The House Ad Hoc Committee on Investigation into the Activities of the Presidential Task Force on Pension Reforms made this known Tuesday during an investigative hearing into the matter. National Assembly's correspondent Charity Tonko reports.
Appearing before the Ad Hoc Committee, the Executive Secretary, Pension Transition Arrangement Directorate, PITAD, Sharon Ikeazu, said PITAD has recovered property worth 13.5 billion naira from some insurance companies. She also urged the committee to help the directorate recover more assets from other insurance firms.
As of date, we have recovered 16 billion naira in terms of cash and properties. Cash is, as of date, some payments just came in. As of date, we have 6.7 billion in our legacy fund recovery account. We established a dedicated account in the CBN, TSA account, solely for the recovery of these pension assets from the insurance companies. And these monies are intact. They have not been touched. Then the properties we recovered were worth 13.5 billion.
However, in his submission, the representative of the Presidential Tax Team on Pension Reforms, Mr. Ngozika Ihioma, said if PITAD had recovered so much, why is the federal government borrowing money to fund budgets? He He also accused retired and serving public office holders of allegedly being beneficiaries of the looted pension fund.
Falana, who incidentally is part of the beneficiaries of the looted funds and properties by the suspected pension thieves. See the occupant of the property situated on number 42 Gada Street, Maitama. That is Chief Femi Falana's hand, even when the property remains an exhibit.
The committee resolved to invite all parties mentioned to appear for further clarification.
We cannot afford, as members of masses representing the Nigerian masses, to sit here and allow some few individuals to be enriching themselves with looted funds that is made for our common benefits.
Earlier, the Speaker of the House, Yakubu Dogara, who was represented by the Deputy Chief Whip of the House, Pali Iriase, said, due to calls by Nigerians on alleged fraudulent activities, the House resolved to constitute the ad hoc committee to get to the root of the matter.
Following the great significance of this sector in the lives of our citizens, especially the retirees, and the receipt of numerous complaints and petitions from relevant stakeholders, it became inevitable for the House of Representatives to set up this ad hoc committee to examine all the facts surrounding the activities of the Presidential Task Force.
The data mining efforts of the federal government through the Ministry of Finance has identified a new batch of over 130,000 high net worth individuals and companies that have potential tax underpayment. Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, revealed this on Tuesday while appearing on the Good Morning Nigeria program of the Nigerian Television Authority. The minister disclosed that the data was currently being compiled by Project Lighthouse in preparation for the closure of the ongoing Voluntary Assets and Income Declaration Scheme, VATE, which ends on 31st March of 2018. Project Lighthouse is a unique project of the Federal Ministry of Finance that combines data from federal and state agencies and foreign countries. She said the data have been received from a number of sources, including land registries of governments of Lagos, Kaduna, Kano, and Ogun States, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, and from a number of foreign jurisdictions under the Exchange of Information Protocols. She explained that the data received from overseas countries would only be used for taxation purposes in line with the protocols governing the exchange of information. Adeosun hailed the unprecedented level of cooperation between the federal and state government, which she said was a marked change from the past when the various arms of government did not align their efforts. Meanwhile, the National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria's trade accounts turned positive in 2017 as a rise in oil export outweighed imports after dollar shortages frustrated transactions. Let's join Catherine Eyamase for more on business news.
There are strong indications that the federal government has tactically approved the payment of 650 million naira subsidy arrears to oil depot owners and marketers. According to a statement by the Depot and Petroleum Product Marketers Association of Nigeria, jointly signed by Mr. Dayo Abiodun, Chairman, and Olufemi Adewale, Executive Secretary, in Lagos, marketers have been reassured about the federal government's commitment to make payments, as evidenced by the request for approval for appropriation of same to the National Assembly. The marketers had 2 weeks ago issued a 14-day ultimatum to the federal government within which to pay its debt of 165 billion naira fuel subsidy arrears, or it will commence the sacking of its staff if government fails to meet the ultimatum. The National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria's trade account turned positive in 2017 as a rise in oil export outweighed imports after dollar shortages frustrated transactions. According to NBS, the balance of trade last year was 4.03 trillion naira, while the net trade balance stood at minus 290 billion naira for 2016. The rise boosts the federal government's ambition to promote exports to support its fragile economy and end foreign exchange while reducing imports. The 2017 gross domestic product rose by 0.8% to emerge from the country's first recession in 25 years. Nigeria, which faced exchange rate crisis in 2016 as oil revenues fell, has been trying to diversify the economy away from oil, boost local production and generate non-oil exports. The Debt Management Office (DMO) has announced the offer for subscription of a 2-year savings bond at 10.74% and 3-year savings bond at 11.74%. According to the DMO, the 2-year savings bonds will be due in March 2020. It, however, did not state how much was offered, but the maximum subscription was 50 million naira at 1,000 naira per unit, subject to minimum subscription of 5,000 naira in multiples of 1,000 naira. The DMO adds that the bond is backed by the full faith and credit of the federal government, with quarterly coupons payment to bond holders.
The federal government has said it will not hesitate to prosecute traders who manipulate their weighment bridge to defraud unsuspecting Nigerians. The Acting Director, Weight and Measure Department, Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, Mohammed Sidi, said this while investigating weight and measure businesses in the nation's capital. Gabriel Kuma has more.
Nigerian businesses have over the years adopted fraudulent measures to cheat unsuspecting customers. For instance, adjustment of fuel pumps, rebagging of fertilizer, rice, beans, cement, among others, is regarded as sharp practices. Some bottling companies are not exempted from this practice, as they short the measures in a bid to make more profit at the expense of their customers. That is why the Weight and Measures Department of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment is on this inspection to ensure compliance as well as punish culprits. The government said it will not hesitate to prosecute the traders who manipulate their weights and measures.
With the provision of the Act, we have the power to prosecute in the Federal High Court every offense committed in respect of weighing or measuring, and that's where our mandate actually ends. As long as we establish or we suspect or we establish a case of short measuring or under measuring or refusal to pay the government stipulated revenue, we now hand it over to the legal department under the ministry for onward prosecution.
The Weight and Measures Department Director said some traders under this category have failed to pay the mandatory fee in respect of weighment breach.
As a result of also non-payment of the statutory fee in respect of the weighing and measuring equipment used in that premises, we successfully sealed and detain the weigh bridge unit in that company, pending further investigation to actually ascertain whether or not we are taking them to court to answer for whatever we are suspecting that is happening in that.
The department was, however, met with strong resistance from some bottling depots. Among those inspected, majority of them who violate the standards were sealed.
Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria gave a boost of $210 million to the interbank foreign exchange market. Let's join Catherine Eyamose for the details of this and more on Business News.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, on Tuesday gave a boost of $210 million to the interbank foreign exchange market. According to figures released by the bank, the CBN offered $100 million to authorized dealers in the wholesale segment of the market, while the small and medium-scale enterprises received the sum of $55 million. Another sum of $55 million was apportioned to invisibles such as tuition fees, medical payments, and basic travel allowance. Acting Director, Corporate Communications Department of the CBN, Isaac Okorafo, who confirmed these figures, reassured the public that the bank would continue to intervene in the interbank foreign exchange market in line with the determination to sustain liquidity in the market and maintain stability. He added that the steps taken so far by the bank in the management of forex had paid off, as reflected by reductions in the country's import bills and accretion to its foreign reserves. The federal government will, April 1 this year, commence the prosecution of tax defaulters who fails to take advantage of the 9-month amnesty window provided by the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme. The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, who revealed this in Abuja, said that from that date, special tax courts will be established to prosecute those who failed to regularize their tax status under VAIDS. In exchange for full and honest declaration, the federal government promises to waive penalties that should have been levied and interest that should have been paid on overdue taxes. Adeosun explained that upon the expiry of the March 31 deadline, the federal government will go after the 130,000 high-profile individuals. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, has warned that a trade war the U.S. President Donald Trump apparently intends to provoke with tariff on steel and aluminium would snuff out global growth. Lagarde adds that in a trade war that will be fed by reciprocal increases of customs tariffs, no one wins, arguing all sides to reach agreement, hold negotiations and consultations to avert the danger the disagreement will pose to trade. Trump boasted last week on Twitter that trade wars are easy to win after his initial announcement of 10% tariff on imports of aluminium and a 25% levy on steel brought into the United States provoked a global outcry. U.S. allies have threatened to retaliate by slapping tariffs on U.S. goods entering their markets. The EU is expected to detail its retaliatory measures on Wednesday.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has assured of the provision of formal financial services, especially credit, through its various intervention programs for women. This is coming on the backdrop of the International Day for Women. Let's join Oluwatoyin Yusuf for the details of this and others.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has assured the provision of formal financial services, especially credit, through its various intervention programs for women. This was disclosed by the Director, Development Finance Department of the CBN, Mudashiru Olaitan, yesterday in Abuja at the CBN 2018 International Women's Day Workshop tagged Women Inspiring Change. Represented by Mrs. Adiza Amina, a Senior Development Finance Officer at the CBN, Olaitan said Apex Bank was favorably disposed to increasing women's access to finance to enable them play their expected role in economic development. She added that by promoting gender equality in access to finance, 50% of the population will be empowered to contribute effectively to economic development. Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC) is expecting the cost of producing crude oil to drop from $20 to $15 per barrel soon. NNPC's Group Managing Director, Dr. Mekanti Baru, said this became necessary to bring down the cost of producing fuel and make the product available. Represented by NNPC Chief Operating Officer Mr. Saidu Mohammed, Baru said the corporation has been innovative, hence the drop in the production cost per barrel of oil. The African Development Bank and its East and North African governors have stressed the need for urgent measures to match the continent's growing population and youth unemployment, which they liken to a tickling time bomb. Africa is projected to have over 840 million youths by 2050, with the continent having the youngest population on Earth. At the end of a two-day consultation at the headquarters of the bank in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, the bank and the governors discussed strategies for closing Africa's $170 billion infrastructure investment gap. To bridge the investment gap, it says it has to ensure inclusive growth and create employment for the continent's population, and meeting endorsed the African Development Bank-led African Investment Forum and described it as a timely opportunity to catalyze investment into projects and attract social impact financing in Africa. The meeting described the continent's growing young population as a potential growth engine for the world.
And for Business News Friday, our correspondent is standing by.
The Corporate Affairs Commission has said it is working to ensure the completion of companies' registration in 2 hours starting from December this year. The Acting Registrar General, CAC, Azuka Azinge, stated this on Thursday during the oversight visit of the Senate Committee on Trade and Investment to the Commission's legal office in Alausa, Ikeja. She said the various innovations that the Commission had put in place had created an enabling environment for customers to register their businesses within 24 hours in line with global standards. This, according to her, has contributed to the improvement in the country's global ranking in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business reported by 24 places in 2017. The establishment of a new regulatory agency, the Nigerian Petroleum Regulatory Commission, as captured in the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, will not lead to the mass retrenchment of workers in the 3 agencies that are currently under the Federal Ministry of Petroleum Resources. According to the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Ibe Kachuku, fears of a possible mass sacking when the 3 affected agencies are collapsed into one entity should be dismissed, as the government has no such plan. In the PIGB, the NPRC will take over the functions of the Petroleum Inspectorate, the Department of Petroleum Resources, and the Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency. The PIGB has been passed by the National Assembly and will become laws as soon as it is assented to by the President. Kachuku also called for a fully independent petroleum industry regulator, adding that proper funding must be given to the NPRC once it commences operation in order to enable it to deliver its mandate as a regulatory commission. Investigation has shown that the federal government is set to offer 2 key power firms, Yola Electricity Distribution Company and Afam Power PLC, for sale to new core investors. For the Yola Disco, this will be the second time the government will be selling the firm, which covers Borno, Adamawa, Yobe, and Taraba states. The head of public communications, BPE, Amina Uthman, confirmed that both the Yola Disco and Afam Power PLC were up for sale to new core investors. According to her, the privatization agency is in the process of obtaining approval from the National Council on Privatization for the appointment of transaction advisors who will be responsible for offering advisory services towards the sale of the electricity companies.
And that has been the Business News Summary on Independent Television Abuja. Many thanks for watching. I'm Nkiru Obuli. Enjoy the rest of the day.